And welcome back to Bengal Bites, a podcast about the Cincinnati Bengals from one fan's real, honest perspective. As always, I'm your host, Derek. This is episode 46. This is the preseason Game 1 recap episode, where the Cincinnati Bengals opened up their season at Paycor Stadium with a 17-14 loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But we won't get too upset about the loss. It was more about what things we can take away from this game, positives, negatives, some things that were interesting. We'll cover all that and more on this episode. In last episode, we discussed some things we were anticipating, looking forward to this game. And the biggest thing, as always, is no injuries. We want to see no injuries because these preseason games don't really mean anything. No point in getting anyone injured, especially not any of these starting players. But we were going to see at least a little bit of Joe Burrow and the rest of this Bengals offensive first team. But going into this game, before they even got to the game, it was a little bit of a scare because on Friday, so the game was Saturday night, Friday they had a walkthrough practice for the first time on the new artificial turf that they just installed. And then the headline came out, Bengals wide receiver Charlie Jones carted off with a non-contact injury to his knee, which is very disturbing. You don't want to see, and anytime you hear non-contact injury, that usually means something bad in terms of like a knee ligament torn or something like that, where they just plan it wrong. And I was immediately assuming the worst about this brand new turf. I'm like, oh my God, they just got on the new turf and he already tore his ACL and walked through. But luckily, it doesn't seem like it's going to be an ACL. It sounds like Andre Iosivas said that he thinks Charlie Jones just banged his knee into somebody else's knee on the practice field, which is a common thing because when they were just out in shorts, I think. I don't know if they were actually wearing pants. Maybe they were, but you can bang your knee into somebody else's knee. And so hopefully it's just a bruise or, a thigh contusion, something that will keep him out a short term. Zac Taylor said he's going to be week to week right now, which is the vague term that he uses for everybody pretty much, it seems like these days. We'll get to some of that later. But Charlie Jones looks like he's going to be okay. Avoided anything serious that will keep him out for the rest of the season. Like they carted him off, hit his head hung, looked like he was in pain. And I thought, oh my God, here's Charlie Jones' second season already done before it started. But so the only thing is he didn't get any snaps in the preseason game. So that kept him from playing in the preseason game at all. We'll see if Charlie Jones is able to play in the preseason at all because he didn't really get much action last year. He was injured for a lot of games last year. Didn't do too much in the preseason last year. Saw a little bit in week 18 against the Browns. But the preseason is really the time where Charlie Jones is going to be able to get some work if he could stay healthy. So hopefully that's what we'll see. But then coming into today, before recording this episode, I was like optimistic, mostly on the positive end of things. And there's still some good things. But some news came out Monday afternoon that really turned everything on its head. Another injury, because I thought, the Bengals got out mostly unscathed with injury. Then all of a sudden, Zac Taylor comes out and says Amarius Mims injured his pec. He's got a strained pec, going to be out several weeks. So we'll get into that, how that all played out. But that was the big headline for this week is first round pick Amarius Mims out several weeks with a strained pec. We didn't know anything about this after the game. He gave interviews after the game, seemed fine, said he was pleased with his performance. Zac Taylor, not that you could ever trust anything Zac Taylor ever says, but after the game, he didn't say anything about an injury. And that's what I mean. Like, some of these guys could tear an ACL and you would never know about it until a week later. And he already had surgery, actually had a torn ACL. We just never said anything. So you never know. That's why I kind of was hesitant on recording. I know people want the podcast like as soon as the game is over, but a lot of these things, you don't know the full context, the full story until a day or two later. And my initial thoughts and my initial takeaways after this game were we pretty much saw everything we needed to see in a positive light in terms of the starting offense came out with Joe Burrow. They maintained a extended drive, got help with a pass interference penalty against Tee Higgins, but the Bucs, they didn't play their defensive starters either. So whatever, it was mostly the Bengals starters going against mostly Buccaneers backups. But either way, they managed to get a touchdown, a nice touchdown pass to Tee Higgins. And Tee Higgins has been getting rave reviews out of training camp about how he's dominating, which we would expect. But that's great to see. We were all worried about maybe Tee Higgins was going to hold out at training camp. But so far, Tee Higgins showed up first day of training camp. He's been dominating all camp, dominated the first preseason game against backups. Everything is looking on track for a big Tee Higgins season this year, which is obviously what he wants so he can get a big contract extension with the Bengals or some other team. And in the Bengals' first drive, we saw a lot of things we saw last year, a lot of passing. We saw the starters were at wide receiver, were Tee Higgins, Trenton Irwin, and Andre Iosivas. So obviously no Jamar Chase at all in this game. They didn't show Jamar Chase on the sidelines either, which is kind of expected. He doesn't want to make any more of a distraction, and the cameras will be looking at him saying, he's still holding in or whatever. So I don't think he was really in attendance on the sidelines. They never showed him, never talked about him. But obviously he's penciled in as the starter for week 1. We'll still have to see. It's going to be interesting as they get down closer and closer to this deadline. We've seen other players, not really similar, but like for the Jets, Hassan Reddick, he got traded to the Jets this offseason from the Eagles. And he was looking for a contract extension with the Eagles. That's why they traded him. The Jets got him. They still didn't give him a contract extension, so he's still looking for a contract extension. So now he requested another trade away from the Jets. He was like, all right, Jets, if you're not going to give me a contract extension, trade me to somebody else who will. So we haven't seen anything like that where Jamar Chase has not yet requested a trade from the Bengals. Like Tee Higgins and Trey Hendrickson, that was part of their strategies this offseason, was to request a trade from the Bengals, and it didn't work. So maybe that's what Jamar Chase is thinking here. It's like, well, there's no real point in me requesting a trade because I already know the Bengals aren't going to give me a trade. If there were a trade market for Jamar Chase, you can bet there'd be, more than 10 teams lining up to try to trade for Jamar Chase. It's not going to happen. Bengals aren't going to let him get away. He's under contract for at least 2 more seasons, but just something to keep an eye on. And that was kind of kept out of the spotlight during the game, but also on Monday when Zac Taylor had to come out and address the press in his press conference. It was all about questions about Amarius Mims, the injury, how long is he going to be out, so on and so forth. That kind of let him dodge the bullet. He didn't have to answer any more questions about, hey, what's up with Jamar Chase's contract? Is the plan still going according to everything you had laid out? No updates on the plan with the Jamar Chase yet, but we can assume he's still working on it with the Bengals. Not with Zac Taylor, but with the Bengals front office. But leaving the contract aside for a moment, let's get back to the game. In the game, Joe Burrow came out. This was his first game since that wrist surgery against the Ravens last fall. He hadn't played in any games, and so we just wanted to see, is Joe Burrow still the same player that we know and love? Answer was yes. It was great to see that the offensive line didn't even let Joe Burrow get touched at all. There was one play where there was a defender coming in, but it was like a screen pass where Joe Burrow was able to just throw the ball away before the defender even got there, even got a hand on him. Overall, nice night for Joe Burrow. Didn't have to do too much. He only played one series, that opening series, and then he was out. But he looked good. He had good timing and good accuracy to his receivers. He had a nice pass on third down to Trenton Irwin. Trent Irwin made a nice catch in traffic. He got hit, but he held onto the ball, picked up the first down. Couple of nice catches by Tee Higgins, including the touchdown where he broke a tackle, like just basically slipped right out of the hands of the defender, walked in the end zone. And we also saw a nice catch and run by Andre Iosivas over the middle. Kind of something you see in these preseason games. I feel like the teams just run a lot of vanilla play calls. So a lot of these very simple, basic concepts, crossing routes over the middle, you see in a lot of games. Same thing with the Bengals. Got Andre Iosivas a 23-yard catch and run. I want to see this year, Andre is talking about how he's improved and become more advanced as a wide receiver. He's making better catches. Like this catch that Andre caught in the game, caught it away from his body with his hands. It wasn't perfectly in his chest. He had to reach up and grab it, but great job. Now, the next step, the next phase of becoming a great wide receiver for Andre is after he makes the catch. He's got the athleticism and the speed to really pick up some extra yards after the catch. So far, we haven't seen that ability. I know he's got it, but he hasn't shown a lot of moves necessarily in terms of like getting away from people. He's got a lot of straight line speed. He can run routes. He can catch. Now, what makes you elite is guys like Jamar Chase, where Chase is so dangerous because after he catches the ball, that's when Jamar Chase becomes even more dangerous. He can just put his foot in the ground and go 60 yards, darting his way through defenders like we saw against the Chiefs, where Zac Taylor can't scheme up a play that says, make the whole defense miss you and look like you're out playing tag on the playground. Zac Taylor, he can draw up the pre-throw, how everybody's supposed to run the routes, but then after the throw, after the catch, when you're just out in open space, no, you can't draw that up and coach that and say, here's what you need to do. It's got to be more of a feel and an instinct thing. And we'll see if Andre is able to develop that. Like, he hasn't gotten much opportunity. Most of his catches were like in the end zone, so there's nowhere to go. He scored, 4 touchdowns last year. Just there's nowhere to run. But I want to see what Andre can do with the ball in his hands, because I haven't seen him make any moves. I haven't seen him break any tackles. I haven't seen him, juke anybody out. Like, I just want to see a little bit more out of Andre. Catching is great, but give me something else. But that's asking a lot. I know, very picky. Trent Irwin. It's not like Trent Irwin's out here doing spin moves on people either. He's a solid possession receiver. If that's what Andre Iosivas can turn into, great. But I feel like he's just such an elite athlete. He should have some kind of juke moves or something. A little bit extra sizzle in his game. We'll see if he can develop that. He's the only second-year player. Speaking of second-year players, we got a lot of Chase Brown, the second-year running back. Surprisingly, Zach Moss, the running back they signed from the Colts in the offseason, was sick. Right before the game, apparently, I don't know what he came down with or how long he's going to be sick, but he wasn't able to play in the game at all. So we didn't get to see any of him. We saw a lot of Chase Brown. And for the Bengals as a team, the running game continues to underwhelm. Chase Brown, I think he had a long of 5 or 6 yards on, let's look up the stats here real quick. Chase Brown, 5 carries, 10 yards, long of 6. So he averaged 2.0 yards per carry. And then getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, Travion Williams, 3 carries, 7 yards, 2.3 yards per carry. As a team, they managed only 36 total yards of rushing for the entire game. And they only had 13 carries. But still, not even 3 yards per carry. That's even worse than they were doing last season when they were one of the worst rushing teams in the league. And I know they are totally invested in the pass. They don't seem to care about the running game at all. This is, kind of, and, it's preseason. Who knows what the actual game plan is going to be. But this is very similar to how games went for the Bengals last year, where less than 100 yards rushing and sometimes less than 50 yards rushing. It's a very imbalanced offense. You're putting a lot of pressure on Joe Burrow in the passing game, which we know is very potent. We've got great receivers, great weapons on the outside. You don't necessarily need to have a I formation lining up and run straight ahead every play. But again, they do play in the AFC North, where all the teams play outside, and every other team has natural grass field. They don't have AstroTurf except for the Bengals, but all the teams play outside, where the weather can play a role. The precipitation, wind, cold, all that kind of stuff can play a factor and is not necessarily beneficial to having a great passing game. If you think about last year, one of Joe Burrow's best games was inside against the Arizona Cardinals, where Jamar Chase had those 3 touchdown catches. But Joe Burrow has shown when he's like at the Sugar Dome in college, inside these domes where there's no wind, there's no rain, nothing to influence Joe Burrow, and his admittedly smaller than average hand size, those type of things are factors, like against the Browns in week 1 last year, where Zac Taylor claimed, I don't know if I believe him, he said week 1 last year was the most rain he'd ever seen in his football career. I have seen a lot of football. It wasn't really raining that hard. I don't know what Zac Taylor was talking about. It was raining, sure, but the Browns did not have any problem with the rain. It was mostly the Bengals and Joe Burrow not being able to play for whatever reason in the rain. So that would have been a great time for a running game. Hopefully this year they don't need it, but eventually, like I say, when it gets cold weather, playoffs time, you need a running game. And the Bengals don't have any power running backs on their roster at all. They have Chase Brown, Travion Williams, Zach Moss, Chris Evans. It's just not a dynamic combination that I'm expecting is going to pick up a ton of yards. So we'll have to see what the offense and Dan Pitcher and the rest of these Bengals coaches, they've got like 10 coaches that they've hired who all played quarterback. They all had grandfathers and great-grandfathers who were coaches at their high school or whatever. So hopefully all these guys can put their one brain together and figure out what to do with this offense in terms of a balanced attack. Because we don't want to see Joe Burrow, as much fun as it would be, we don't want to necessarily see Joe Burrow going back and throwing the ball 40 times every game, because that means Joe Burrow is opening himself up to get hit 40 times a game, which is exactly how he got injured last year. So more running, more balance, we'll have to see. Something we wanted to see was Jake Browning just being a better, more consistent backup than he did last preseason. And he basically came in and looked exactly like he did last preseason, which was terrible. He came in, he went 10 for 18 passing for 52 yards, which is somehow he had less than 3 yards per throwing attempt. Not very good. And also had an interception. So his rating was not good at all. And his interception that he threw was a deep pass. He was trying to throw it deep to Kwame Lassiter up the left sideline. The route wasn't great in terms of Kwame Lassiter. I mean, he might have had a half a step, but he didn't have a ton of separation. But also, Jake Browning doesn't have a very strong arm. So the ball only went like 40 yards in the air, and it was underthrown, and that gave the defender a chance to come back and intercept the ball. I would have liked to see Kwame Lassiter try to make a little bit stronger effort to fight through that defender and at least prevent him from intercepting the pass. You know, if you're not going to catch it, at least make sure your opponent isn't able to catch it. Even an offensive pass interference in that situation would have been better than letting the defender catch it. So a little bit, we want to see a better effort, stronger play out of Kwame Lassiter, but just not a good pass, not a good route, not a good effort at the end of the route. All in all, didn't see a whole lot from Jake Browning in this game, but he's pretty much already cemented himself as the backup to Joe Burrow either way, just because he played in all those games at the end of last season. They signed him to a 2-year contract extension, so the Bengals aren't going to cut him for sure. He's pretty much, the job is his. It was more just like to go out there and get some experience. And we already know what the Jake Browning experience is. It's substandard, but he's a serviceable backup, as we already found out. Nothing to get excited about, but kind of just disappointing Jake Browning didn't perform a little bit better. That said, we did see some action heating up in the punter battle. They got rid of Austin McNamara, their punter that he brought in early in free agency. Ryan Rico, Utah punter, also a rookie free agent they signed within the last few weeks. New kicker in camp, and he's been booming them. And both the punters, actually. Brad Robbins, the rookie that they drafted last year out of Michigan, his first punt only went 37 yards. And a typical Brad Robbins punt went 37 yards, but it was a fair catch, not inside the 20-yard line. It was about the 23-yard line. But, not very deep. If you have that close of an opportunity, you might as well just go for it if you're only going to punt it 37 yards. But to his credit, Brad Robbins came back after that, and he even got off a 60-yarder. And these guys Ryan Rico and Brad Robbins were punting it almost 60 yards, like back and forth. So great punting battle. Rico, he almost pinned them inside their own 5-yard line, but the ball bounced and went into the end zone. Went 60 yards, but only a net of 40 because of the touchback. But Rico was obviously the much farther punter, but his punts were getting returned. So it doesn't really matter how far you punt it. Gross punting distance is more about how far the other team is able to return it if they get a return. So Rico's punts, he was kicking them further, but they were getting returned basically to make up all the difference. So whichever one's more effective, I don't know. I think Ryan Rico obviously has more upside potential in terms of a stronger leg. But Brad Robbins showed he's got some distance too. So we'll have to see. These first 3 preseason games, I think it's going to be whoever is the most consistent and consistently good. I'd say it's neck and neck so far. One of the other things we saw was some of the rookies getting their first action. That was the biggest thing outside of Joe Burrow that I wanted to see coming into this game was Amarius Mims, the first round offensive tackle out of Georgia. He hadn't got a lot of playing time in college. We wanted to see how does he look, this big guy. He's been getting all these positive reviews about how he's dominating everybody in practice. I wanted to see how does he look in a real game against real NFL competition. And the biggest thing you could say about Amarius Mims in this game, he played the first quarter. So Joe Burrow played the first series. Then they swapped out basically everybody except for Amarius Mims, brought in all the second team and third team offensive linemen and skill position players with Jake Browning, but left Amarius Mims out there for the first quarter. I think just because he's so inexperienced, they wanted to give him a little bit more playing time than some of the other older, more experienced veterans like Ted Karras, Orlando Brown Jr., those type of guys. And for Amarius, the review on him, I would say, is nothing jumped out, which is good. Like, you didn't notice him. He didn't make any penalties. Nothing was obviously bad. So, like, he didn't stand out and like, oh, he missed a block, missed an assignment, did something totally wrong. He looked like he was just as good as all the rest of those guys out there. And, he's the only rookie out there. So if you can say rookie making his first preseason game appearance and nothing goes terribly wrong, that's pretty good. Like, he didn't have any amazing plays where he was like pancaking guys or totally blowing somebody up off the ball. He had totally fine pass blocking, totally fine run blocking. Nothing, amazing, but for your first preseason game ever, I'll take competent, any day. That's fine. Much better than some of the players they had later in the game. We'll get to that. But overall, it was an encouraging first start. And so I mentioned the injury. So they interviewed Amarius Mims after the game. He didn't report any injuries. So said like he felt like he played pretty good. All of a sudden, Zac Taylor Monday says, oh, boom, Amarius Mims out several weeks. We got the Zac Taylor preseason, several weeks. And then the reporters asked for clarification. And I don't know if Zac Taylor thinks he's funny or he's trying to be cute, but he had printed out on the desk next to him. He's like, well, let me just check here. The Webster's Dictionary of several is a number, indefinite number, that's more than two and less than many. And then he just gave him this big Zac Taylor smile. And oh my, if I were a reporter and I asked a serious question and somebody just gave me, well, the Webster's definition of what I just said is blah, blah, blah. Like, oh my God, that's so frustrating. But I'm not a reporter, so I don't have to get mad about these type of things. But I mean, the Bengals better be good this year. Because if Zac Taylor is going to start having those kind of responses and the team is not good, fans and reporters are going to turn on him quick with those kind of answers. Like last week, it was, I'm not going to answer that question, so I'm not going to. Now he's pulling out Webster's definition of several. I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't get it. But whatever. They don't have to answer the questions. They're not under oath. If he were a coach like Bill Belichick, he would just grumble and say, next question. I don't know. So, none of these coaches are really giving you great answers. And I don't know why they even hold these press conferences besides the fact they could just have a press announcement say, Amarius Mims out several weeks, end of story, goodbye. For some reason, they put Zac Taylor in front of a camera, have him speak into a microphone. It doesn't really help the team at all whenever Zac Taylor speaks into a microphone, but he has to do it because he's a team representative. So, yeah, Amarius Mims. And then, surprisingly, right after that, they let the reporters interview Amarius Mims in the locker room, which didn't make sense to me because normally they don't let injured players give interviews because it puts them in a weird situation, exactly like what happened where Zac Taylor was very vague with how long Amarius Mims was going to be out or when or how he got injured. He said it was non-surgical, but they're just going to play it by ear week to week, several weeks he'll be out. Luckily, by coincidence, Trent Brown, the veteran right tackle, is returning to practice this week. So as Amarius is going to be sitting out, Trent Brown is going to return, basically slide right into that starting right tackle position. But obviously, Amarius was disappointed that he won't be able to continue competing with Trent Brown head-to-head for that starting right tackle spot. But the reporters, they're asking him a question. Well, how'd you get injured? When did it happen? How'd you do it? And all he could say was, well, Zac Taylor already answered all those questions. I can't really say anything. So it was just, why would the media department even let him do an interview? Just tell the reporters no interviews. He's injured. Get away. But he answered questions just about like how did he think he played in the preseason game and the limited sample size that he did get. And he said he's a perfectionist, so there were small things that he could improve on, like hand placement, foot placement, little small details. But he felt like he was overall satisfied, and I felt the same way. Like, sure, you could nitpick little things here and there. Everybody could improve on, and no matter who you are, even Joe Burrow, he could probably find something he could do better in the game. But no major issues, no major mistakes, nothing super negative to correct. So it was a positive first outing. The only thing is the injury. And to have it happen in only a quarter. And he said that because they were like, well, you didn't seem injured after the game, so like, how'd you know, or when did it happen? And he kind of made it sound like maybe he was in denial a little bit. And I understand that as an athlete, you're playing in your very first NFL competition, you barely played, and the whole reason why he got drafted where he was is people were like, oh, he's so big, so talented, but he got injured last year. He had the ankle injury, didn't play a whole lot, had been injured maybe a couple times before that, so teams were kind of a little bit wary of drafting him too high because he could be a little bit of a risky pick. And now, you come in your first game, you're already kind of injured. So I can see where, as a player, you don't want to admit to yourself that you're injured. Oh, I'm fine. It'll be okay. Just a little, nothing to worry about. I'm fine. And then, maybe you wake up the next morning and actually, maybe I'm not feeling quite as fine as I thought I was. He said that basically it took him a while to admit that he was injured. He was hurt. There's a difference between pain and injury. You can fight through pain because pain is just a normal, can be part of just exercising. You work out, you build up lactic acid, you feel pain in your muscles. But that's different from being injured, where you're going to maybe cause yourself even more permanent long-term damage if you try to fight through an injury. So that's kind of the situation Amarius Mims is dealing with right now. He had to admit to himself, okay, this isn't something I can fight through. This is an injury that's going to take rehab. It's going to take time and rehabilitation recovery. So he's going to have to rest. And that's going to probably mean that Trent Brown is going to be the week 1 starter locked in. Like I already anticipated he would be. But people were so excited and, first round pick. They were talking about how he might be the first round tackle to start in his first game week 1 since Anthony Munoz, saying how he's got the most potential since Anthony Munoz. Everybody's comparing him to Anthony Munoz. Let's pump the brakes. Let's keep our expectations in check. This guy is very young. He's got a lot of football ahead of him, but he's probably not going to be a Hall of Fame Anthony Munoz. We want him to be. That's the best case scenario, but he's got to play more than a quarter of a preseason game before he's Anthony Munoz. Trent Brown's going to be out there week 1, and I imagine he'll be totally fine too. Now, outside of Amarius Mims, we were anticipating the rookies getting some of their first NFL action too. And going into this game, McKinley Jackson, the big nose tackle, we already knew he had a little bit of an injury in training camp. He wasn't going to be able to play. But we did see Chris Jenkins, number 90 out of Michigan, second-round pick, the mutant, as they call him. Thing with Chris Jenkins was he's a little bit undersized, but he supposedly have good strength for his size. He's supposed to be super strong. Didn't really see it show up in this first game. Unfortunately, Chris Jenkins got pushed around by the Buccaneers offensive lineman. Sometimes on a double team, but sometimes single team, he was getting pushed around. Got pancaked on their touchdown. He got pancaked a couple times, actually, where he just got totally wiped out of the play. Didn't really give much resistance at all. And you never saw that. I mean, you can't compare him to, a Pro Bowler like DJ Reader yet. Obviously, he's a rookie playing his first preseason game, but it was the type of play you never saw happen to DJ Reader unless he got injured. The only time you saw DJ Reader get pancaked was when he hurt his knee and he like fell over and couldn't hold himself up because he was injured. But like other than that, offensive linemen could not move DJ Reader out of the way. So this is a little bit concerning because these weren't even Tampa Bay's like starting offensive linemen, and they were manhandling Chris Jenkins. So he didn't really get close on any passing downs. He was always just kind of standing at, didn't get any penetration in the passing game. And in the running game, he was getting pushed around. So hopefully we'll see a better performance out of Chris Jenkins as he figures out the professional game. It's totally different level of competition. So hopefully he can rise to the competition level. But in his first game, not so good. But on the flip side, positive note, Jermaine Burton, their third-round pick, he was the third-round pick, Jermaine Burton out of Alabama. He had a few nice catches, including a nice touchdown and another long pass up the left sideline from Logan Woodside. The only thing that was curious about Jermaine Burton was he didn't play until the second half. He didn't play with Joe Burrow, and he didn't play with Jake Browning. It was all second half, where he was with the third string. And so the defenders he was going up against weren't as talented as he was. Like he was, as we said, he's a first-round talent, so he's got elite speed, elite explosiveness, playmaking ability, and that was great to see that he was dominating lesser competition. That's what we want to see. But it'll be interesting to see if he is able to get some more snaps with the maybe second string at least. I think the Bengals want to do it like whoever's got the most seniority and the veteran guys who have been around with the program the longest, like Trenton Irwin, Andre Iosivas. I can see where, you don't want to put a rookie immediately over guys who have been with the team for like 5 seasons, who know all the offensive plays like the back of their hand, and you can count on them for a consistent performance. Makes sense to get the rookie Jermaine Burton in a little bit later and let him dominate, but we'll see. I mean, I expect to see him during more of the regular season, hopefully, because a lot of people were saying he could even challenge for that third wide receiver spot, but right now, Jermaine Burton is not in the running for the starting third wide receiver. We'll see if he is able to quickly elevate himself as time goes on. I mean, if he keeps making big-time plays, making touchdowns, it's hard to ignore, stories like that. But you never know. It's one game. Maybe he just had a couple of nice plays, and in practice he's blowing his assignments. So we don't know. But at least it's good to get that on tape. First touchdown, it was a nice play. He'll have to work on his celebration. He kind of just did like a fall backwards onto his back. He's kind of said he didn't really have anything planned out. But Logan Woodside, the backup quarterback, who has been around the league a bunch of times, he was pumped up because it was a nice throw, like better than Jake Browning's throw. But like I said, the route Jermaine Burton ran was better than Kwame Lassiter, because Jermaine Burton, it was a go route, but he had a nice hesitation move when he got to the defender to kind of make him pause, then ran right by him, got at least a yard or two of separation, something that a lot of the Bengals receivers have struggled to do recently. But Jermaine Burton got that separation, got a nice separated area for Logan Woodside to drop the ball in the bucket so that it wasn't a contested catch. And that was good to see. That let the Bengals go up on top. Didn't last very long, but it was at least a good moment in the game. All the fans were going crazy, having a long touchdown pass. Something for the fans to see. And just as a side note, the energy in Paycor Stadium was good. The fans were all excited. I was surprised, if you look at some of these other preseason games around the league, the fans aren't showing up for some of these games. The seats are like half full. Bengals look like they almost sold out the stadium. I wouldn't say it was a sellout, but at least 75% of the seats looked like they were full, which is great for, middle of August preseason game. Bengals are making that money, so good for them. The only thing I would say is the sound system was so loud you couldn't hear the fans, and that's how it was when I went to the game. It was like the crowd noise isn't really that loud. It's the music. The DJ, he's constantly playing like this really loud dance hall, trap music, pump up type of anthems, but it's all like so full of sirens and blaring noises. It gets a little bit like cacophonous. I got a headache when I was at the game, when I went there in person, but watching it on TV, I don't know if the audio mix was a little bit off, but it just seemed like all you could hear was the music from the stadium, just like the bass and all this noise the entire game. So like watching the game back, I had to, to keep the sound turned down because it was just a nightmare. So I don't know if the Bengals, I don't know if I'm actually going to go to another game because that just reminded me about how loud and annoying the sound inside the stadium was. I know they want to bring like more excitement and stuff, but I wish they would kind of maybe have it more of a pleasing, I know they want to keep the energy up, but like 3 hours of sirens going off is just a little bit too much for me. I'm sorry, I can't take it. But anyway, enough tangent about how the Bengals give me a headache with their sound system. The rookies. So what else did we see from the rookies? I don't think Eric All, the tight end, played, but he's working his way back in practice. The cornerback, fifth-round pick Josh Newton, he had a nice interception of Kyle Trask on, I think it was the Buccaneers' second and third drive, where he undercut the wide receiver's route. The wide receiver was in the slot, lined up in the slot. Josh Newton was guarding him, kind of man trail coverage. Josh Newton knew he had safety help deep over the top, so he was kind of playing underneath, trailing the receiver as he went down the field. The receiver kind of faked like he was going in, then broke it out 45 degrees to the corner, out to the flag route. Josh Newton stayed patient on the route, didn't get nervous, knew where his help was coming from, and the throw was a little bit underthrown, so that gave Josh Newton a chance to come back and undercut it and pick it off. And he showed great catching ability at the point, going up, snagging the ball. It just looked like a wide receiver going up and catching the ball. So very natural. He said he used to play wide receiver, so he knew what to look for in the route. He wasn't fooled on the route. Great recognition skills by Josh Newton and way to make the play. It's good to be in position. Like we see guys like DJ Turner can sometimes get himself in position, but then doesn't make the interception. So instead of just breaking it up, finish the play, make an interception. On that same note, Dax Hill, similar position. He's been playing outside cornerback and slot cornerback. He was making his debut at corner. He did get his hands on the ball a number of times, broke up a number of passes, almost had an interception, but they said it touched the ground. But he was close. He tipped the ball up in the air, broke it up in front of the receiver, almost came down with it, but it was ruled incomplete. Initially, they said interception, but then the other referee came in, said it touched the ground. Promising for Dax Hill in that we knew he has that athletic ability to come up and make dynamic, athletic, explosive plays. Just maybe he was a little bit out of position last year. And they've all been talking about how the communication was so good. We'll have to see because Geno Stone and Vaughn Bell, who are going to be the starting free safeties, they did not play in this game. So it was mostly backups along the defensive line. And I don't know if Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt played, but it was mostly the backup defense. Only the Bengals starting offense really played much in this game. But defenders, outside of the starters, not perfect, but what I would say is overall they played with great energy, especially like these guys who, like Carlos Davis and some of these guys who have been out of the league, like they weren't even playing in the NFL last year. They were on practice squads or played in other leagues. They kind of looked like they were playing, in what could be their last game ever. So they were going crazy. If they made any kind of big play, they were celebrating. And it was, intense. That's what you want to see. Because last year, the depth for the Bengals was really a question right from the preseason. Because we knew, okay, the Bengals starters are good. They had been to 2 back-to-back AFC championship games. You felt confident in all the starters. But then the question was, all the guys in the the backup roles, second string, third string, they weren't any good at all. And so this year, I feel like because they went younger, they had 10 draft picks. They were able to kind of restock the cabinet, get some of the older veterans off the roster. No offense, but guys like safety Mike Thomas, basically a glorified coach last year. Like he was taking up a roster spot that could have been occupied by somebody who had actual value, who could come in and play. So now they have guys, instead of like glorified coaches, they have guys who can actually play. And they have Vaughn Bell, who's like another coach on the field because he's a veteran guy. He's a good role model for the younger guys, but he's also capable of playing. So that's something that's an improvement. It's just overall, I thought the Bengals backups looked better than they did last season. So that's, hopefully we don't have to see any of these guys play during the regular season. But if they do, the drop off hopefully won't be as bad. And hopefully if, the starter needs a little bit of a break during the game or whatever, the level of play won't be such a dip when they do come in. And, we see different, it's hot, especially early in the season when it's 90 degrees or something like that. Guys can't play every single snap, so they'll have to rotate in and out. And when they do rotate, we'll want to keep the level of performance at a pretty consistently high level. One of the players that did kind of pop out to me was linebacker. I don't know if I'm saying it correctly, but Mema Jongmeta. He's not a very big guy. I think he was only like 6'2", 230, but very athletic looking guy. And he led the team with 10 tackles. He was in on a lot of tackles. I didn't see too many missed tackles from him, but making plays, flying all over the place. And maybe kind of like a Clay Johnston, kind of like a preseason hero. I don't know if he'll actually play, or even make the team, but he did everything he could do in this game with his 10 tackles to make his case for making the team. He kind of reminds me of what I thought Akeem Davis Gaither was going to be. So everybody talked about how Akeem Davis Gaither was this athletic, hybrid, pass rushing linebacker. And we haven't really seen much of that at all. Like Akeem Davis Gaither, they signed him to a contract extension, I think more for his special teams value. But as a linebacker, he hasn't really shown too much. I mean, they let Marcus Bailey go to the Cardinals. They still got Joe Bacci on the roster. So the Bengals linebacker position, not necessarily great in most recent years outside of Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt. So maybe this young meta guy can bring a little depth to that linebacker position that they've been really needing. Outside of that, we also saw Cedric Johnson, the defensive end or edge player from Ole Miss. He was in there for a considerable amount of time, and he made some good plays, got in on some tackles, showed some good disruptiveness, didn't get pushed around. That's the biggest thing you want to see is just how do these guys look matched up against NFL level competition. A lot of times it's easy to go up against lesser competition when you're in college and look like a superstar. But then when you get against somebody your own size, your own speed, your own strength, different story. So it was good to see at least Cedric Johnson holding his own out there, looking like he could play some snaps. And we got to see some of the guys who've been around for a while, like Joseph Osai, Jeff Gunter. Some of those guys were out there making plays, playing hard. That's what I wanted to see. I didn't see him make a play, but I saw the safety Dejon Anthony, one of the guys that they've been talking about, has been making a bunch of plays in training camp, also out of Ole Miss. He came up with a bloody nose in this game, so he was walking off with a towel over his face. I think the reports are he has a broken nose. Hopefully it's not too serious and something he'll be able to play through. Not obviously not good or not comfortable if you broke your nose. And again, so I don't know how he did that, if he got like poked through his face mask or if he just didn't have his helmet really fitting correctly, because your face mask should prevent your nose from getting broken unless his helmet kind of like, sometimes your helmet can slip and slide down onto the bridge of your nose. So you see these guys with the bridge of their nose all cut and bloody, bleeding down their face, like TJ Watt and Tim Krumgry, because the old helmets used to slide around. Usually the helmets these days stay in place, but somehow dude broke his nose, so he's going to be, we'll have to watch and see how he deals with that. Matt Lee, the center out of Miami, he got a few snaps at the very end of the game. Didn't notice anything in terms of, bad snaps or penalties from him, no holding. So, for an offensive lineman, if you never hear their name called, that's probably a good sign. Speaking of which, that brings me to one of the bad sides of the game, which was, of course, Jackson Carman. Jackson Carman, as we know, is a second-round pick, same draft with Jamar Chase. So they traded down and picked up Jackson Carman in the second round, and they're talking about how he's going to be the left tackle of the future. They thought he could replace Jonah Williams because he was coming from a big program out of Clemson where he played with Trevor Lawrence. They had high hopes for Jackson Carman. So far, he has not lived up to those hopes whatsoever. And in this game, maybe his worst performance as a Bengal. He came out and he's playing with the second and third team. He came out and he played with that second group in, and it went okay, but then Jake Browning went back to pass. They looked like they converted on a long third down, but then there's a flag. Oh, holding penalty. And Anthony Munoz, who's calling the game for the Bengals announce crew, he's like, yep, looked like we had a takedown over there. And yeah, if you watch the replay, Jackson Carman, slow to get out of his pass stance, slow to react. He lets the defender close the distance onto him. Doesn't even get a hand on him until it's too late. And then basically tackles the guy. Like, just wraps his arms around the defender, drags him to the ground. Obvious hold. They're going to call that every time. And he had another play very similar. Left tackle, he's lined up against the defensive end. Guy comes in on the pass rush. Jackson Carman has bad technique, doesn't move his feet, doesn't seem to have any way to counter the outside move, and just tackles the guy trying to go around the edge. You know, guys like Trey Hendrickson are going to do the swim move or try to rip move around the outside like pretty much every play. Jackson Carman's got to have something to get ready to counter that other than just tackling people. But that's what he did. Unfortunately, he got 2 holding penalties. One of them was not accepted because it was going to be like a 4th down, or nothing happened for the Bengals that was good anyway, so that it was declined. But just 2 bad holding penalties. And then when the Bengals were backed up inside their own 10-yard line, so they're trying to get a little bit of an extra space by drawing the Buccaneers defense to jump off sides. Well, the only person who jumped off sides was Jackson Carman. So they got pushed up even further back into their own territory. Just mental mistakes, something you don't expect out of a guy going into his 4th season in the NFL. Like, these are rookie mistakes, or mistakes that you don't get to make more than once because they cut you. He's got a big salary because he was a 2nd-round draft pick. Those salaries, those contracts are already predetermined. So Jackson Carman is supposed to be making like multiple millions of dollars this season. And I don't know what the Bengals are paying for or why they would continue to keep him on the roster. Because he can't play if he's just going to get a penalty every play and go out and cost your team. You know, that's going to cost you field position, cost you points, cost you wins. So you don't want somebody who's a net negative on the roster, costing you games and costing you millions of dollars on top of that. Like I said last season, I think if they could have traded Jackson Carman for anything, they would have, but obviously nobody gave them any kind of a trade offer. This season, like this kind of performance, you're not going to get any kind of trade value out of Jackson Carman. They may have to just cut him. That's what I would do. Just cut him, get him off the roster, cut bait. Like, they've kept him around way too long. He's never going to turn anything. Just get him off the roster and get him out of here. But we'll see. We'll see how long he lasts on the roster, because they don't have to cut until basically the end of the preseason. It's kind of weird. I mean, I guess it makes sense because they used to do it where they would do the progressive cuts as they went. They'd cut, 5 guys here, 10 guys here, and it would kind of get trimmed down over time. Now they just do all one big cut. So everybody stays in training camp pretty much the whole time. Nobody gets cut until the very end. So we might have to see more of Jackson Carman. Hasn't been a good career so far. But for the rookies, like I said, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. It's their first season, first NFL action. I'm not going to be too hard on them. Got to be hard on Jackson Carman because he's been through this before. We've seen this whole Jackson Carman terrible song and dance before. So you got to just call it like you see it. And Jackson Carman should not be playing on the Bengals anymore. But I think the Bengals are going to have some joint practices coming up with, it might be the Colts, because let's take a look here. Take a look real quick at their schedule. Oh no, they got the Bears coming up, and then the Colts is their 3rd preseason game. I think they might have some inter-team joint practices, but you never know. Some of these practices get canceled for whatever reason. So we'll have to see if there's any news that's going to come out. It's going to be the 17th. What's the 17th? Next game, Saturday. So they play another Saturday game, 1 o'clock on NFL Network against the Bears. No night game, so I think that's going to be a nationally televised game. I don't anticipate to see many of the Bengals starters playing. Really no reason to play the starters at all. Joe Burrow already got his touchdown drive in. That's more snaps, because coming into the game, Joe Burrow had only played a total of 3 preseason snaps in his whole NFL career. So he got 4 or 5 times more snaps in just this one game than he had previously in his entire NFL camp. So that's good. I think we've seen all we need to see out of Joe Burrow from here on out. Let's get the young guys, guys like Jermaine Burton who need a little bit more experience without getting injured. That's the trade-off is, Amarius Mims was like, oh, great, get the young rookie some experience, and then he's injured first game after one quarter. So you never want to see that. Luckily, it was nothing too serious. We already had one serious injury with Cam Sample out for the year with the Achilles injury. Knock on wood, nothing like that happens for the rest of training camp or the rest of the season, for that matter. But injuries are a part of the game. It's just a matter of trying to get the most players healthy to this first game of the season that we can. Because the opener against the Patriots, you don't want to say automatic W, but Patriots against the Panthers, neither one of those teams look good in their preseason game. Yeah, it was in the rain at Gillette Stadium, but Panthers should be a win. Patriots should be a win. Commanders in week 3 should also be a win. So Chiefs week 2, I'm expecting at least a 3-1 start, but that means everybody's got to stay healthy and they have to sign Ja'Marr Chase to a contract extension. It's like I said, it's not Labor Day yet, so if you get toward Labor Day weekend and Ja'Marr Chase hasn't signed a contract, then I'll start getting a little bit antsy, but nothing to worry about right now. So all fingers crossed they get everything sorted out. But I'll come back next time like I said, if anything happens news-wise, breaking news will come back and maybe a little bit of a preview of this Bears preseason game. Caleb Williams, number 1 overall pick, did look pretty good in his limited sample size. He had some nice plays on the run, threw across his body, stuff like that. So it'll be interesting to see if he plays against the Bengals defense. That'll be at least something to watch in that game. I'll come back with the next episode 47. But if you've listened this long, thank you. Don't forget to give me a thumbs up, subscribe, follow, do all that stuff so you get the next episode when it comes out. And until next time, I'm going to leave you with a hoo-day and stay hungry for more Bengal Bites.